This is Dr.RED Panda.
Do you know about the cruel witch hunts during the Middle Ages? If accused of being a witch during the time, what kind of brutal fate would one face? When the demons within everyone start roaring, what would the world become? I am Dr. Red Panda, and in the following content, I will explore the answers to these questions together with you. The history of witches is long-standing. In fairy tales, except for Cinderella, witches are almost always portrayed as villains, such as the witches in Sleeping Beauty and Snow White. Why are these witches depicted as older women? Well, in ancient villages of primitive societies, the role of a witch involved tapping into the power of spirits, praying for protection, healing, assisting in childbirth or abortion, and even handling funerals. These skills required accumulated experience, and it was often older women who possessed them. Hence, they came to be known as witches or wise women. In the earlier, more secluded times, witches were highly respected for their perceived ability to control mysterious forces. The traditional role of witches held a high status in the Germanic regions. So, why did these respected witches, once held in high esteem, become targets for persecution in the 16th and 17th centuries? The beginning of the cruel witch-hunting movement. In the early Middle Ages, Christianity took root in the Germanic regions, and the Church, based on its doctrine, asserted strict subordination of women to men. In order to diminish the status of women, the Church began to disdain them, portraying them as witches and subjecting them to persecution, even burning alleged witches alive. Records of suppressing witches in Europe date back to the early 15th century, reaching a peak in the late 15th century. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII issued a decree stating that witches cannot be forgiven, for they are evil and shameless. Subsequently, all clergy members were mobilized to collectively suppress witches. 2 years later, in 1486, missionaries Heinrich and Jacob Sprenger penned the infamous Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. This book was ubiquitous at the time and outlined various methods to identify witches, marking the beginning of the notorious European witch trials. This book for the first time generalized and imposed devil and witchcraft knowledge, popular in the 15th century, onto women. Due to the lack of understanding of this new knowledge at the time, people blindly accepted the descriptions in the book as truth, leading to the innocent deaths of thousands of women burned at the stake. For instance, it was believed that every night witches would anoint themselves with devil's oil made from dolls and then fly to the gathering place of witches' sabbaths through cracks, locks, chimneys, smoke vents, broomsticks, spindles, or even underground tunnels. Considered meeting spots for the devil. People also thought that wicked thoughts could lead to devilish temptations, causing women to engage in abortions and indulge themselves. Disasters like hailstorms, poor harvests, and diseases were also attributed to the actions of witches. Due to being enchanted, witches in The Witch's Hammer are no longer sensitive to pain. According to the theory in the book, they can undergo any torture. However, despite the methods described for identifying, interrogating, and eliminating witches, there is no mention of charges or defense in these processes. Apart from harsh interrogations and forced confessions, the so-called witch tests are absurd, such as immersing their hands in boiling water, removing their sacred rings, and then tightly wrapping their hands with bandages, tormenting them until they feel no pain after 3 days. If no traces of the ring are found after 3 days, they are considered innocent. Similarly, if the accused, bound hand and foot, is thrown into a lake and doesn't sink, they are innocent, and so on. Thousands and thousands of innocent women slaughtered. Due to the darkness and absurdity of the witch trials, the majority of those executed as witches were actually innocent. According to the judge's ludicrous theories, regardless of the accused actions or reactions, they would be deemed witches and face execution. For instance, if the defendant endured torture, she was undoubtedly a witch. If she couldn't withstand torture and died, then she was considered abandoned by the devil. Back then, Europeans started killing cats because they believed cats were the accomplices of witches, leading to a near extinction of cats in the Middle Ages. As a result, a massive number of cats were killed, causing a rampant increase in the rat population and triggering the horrifying outbreak of the bubonic plague, which claimed the lives of over 25 million people in Europe. Amidst this evil tide sweeping across Europe, the dark side of human nature has been unleashed. Many view the trial of witches as a prime opportunity to indulge in, toy with, and degrade women, satisfying their own base desires. Meanwhile, judges and female judges alike exploit this movement to line their pockets. All property of women labeled as witches or hags falls into the hands of the executioners. For each witch burned, the executioners demand money from the deceased's family for the wood and to host celebratory feasts. The blood of these victims ultimately turns into gold and silver coins, while the convicted women are burned alive or boiled to death. Since the early 17th century, there has been a growing outcry in Western Europe against the persecution of witches. In 1614, the Spanish Inquisition concluded, based on a comprehensive report from judges in the northern regions, that accusations of witchcraft were entirely unfounded and baseless. They called for strengthening the church and judicial institutions, reforming administrative management, and rejecting any further witchcraft charges. With the rise of the Renaissance and later the Enlightenment, these materialistic thoughts gained significant expansion and promotion, allowing people to comprehend things more rationally. Simultaneously, through the efforts of scientists and philosophers, the authority of the supernatural over nature and the state broke free from the shackles of divine power. Superstitious beliefs in magic and witchcraft were dispelled. Under the powerful influence of the Enlightenment, various Western European countries enacted prohibitions against the persecution of girls accused of being bewitched. Afterward, the widespread witch trials were mostly brought under control, but the issue persisted. The last German witch was executed in 1775, and the final European witch, Anna Goldie, was beheaded in Switzerland in 1782. With that, the European witch trials that had ravaged the continent for 3 centuries came to an end. The devil in everyone's heart. The answer is human nature, as each person harbors that devil within. In medieval Europe, the Catholic Church dominated spiritual life. Whether townspeople or rural farmers, their daily routines revolved around work, meals, and sleep. Beyond that, there were no leisure or entertainment activities. For the majority who were illiterate, the only pastime was attending religious services. Their spiritual world was either filled with religion or left blank. Countless regulations and restrictions imposed by the Catholic Church tightly bound people's bodies and minds. Lives were marked by persistent poverty, oppressive labor, and the fear of punishment. Apart from the promise of heaven, there was little hope for improving their circumstances. In this gloomy and hopeless existence, people faced continuous dread of disasters. Plagues, wars, famines, or fires repeatedly plunged their lives into darkness, and they were powerless in the face of such conditions. The only recourse was to pray, turning to possible magical beliefs when confronted with these situations. In a stifling and oppressive environment, feelings of hatred, envy, jealousy, and the desire for revenge grow continuously, gradually developing into various forms of harm. These emotional impulses are like a gas accumulating in people's hearts, and the more they are suppressed by rules and regulations, the more they will eventually erupt with astonishing force. It can be anticipated that once these pent-up emotions find a legitimate outlet, the strongly suppressed feelings will undoubtedly pour out. Despite the devout saintly life promoted by the Church setting standards for people's earthly existence, the reality is that ordinary individuals cannot attain the divine nature of a saint. As a result, people must constantly struggle against the guilt that torments their inner selves. Hence, they harbor resentment towards the worldly aspects of their lives because these aspects continually tempt them, hindering their journey towards becoming saints. Therefore, ordinary people always eagerly need a scapegoat to shift their own blame onto others and release the suppressed emotions within themselves. At the end of the 16th century, a potent force emerged, combining invasive feelings, self-hatred, fear, and a sense of guilt. This force fueled the religious reform movement, accompanied by persecution of enemies with differing worldviews and the underlying emotions of hatred. As for the collective hysteria and persecution of witches, it's challenging to pinpoint a single factor that led to this widespread madness. This question seems elusive, much like trying to determine whether an avalanche is caused by a mountain goat stepping on it or a bird flapping its wings above. The eruption of destructive potential may have been triggered by a crucial factor, which could either be inherent in the events or brought about by a very small catalyst. What can be certain is that behind the witch hunt, there's a strong drive among people from all walks of life to shift their own sense of guilt and resentment onto others. Fueled by this need, whether driven by hatred, jealousy, or just a random outburst, individuals can freely accuse those around them of being witches. Some who are accused of being witches under torture or pressure admit to their crimes. Knowing that they are unlikely to escape death, they start implicating others, known or potential accusers, as conspirators. Then there are opportunists who, having seen enough opportunities to strike against enemies or profit for themselves, instruct others to falsely accuse their targets, using it as a means to vent their hatred or seize others' property. Many accusers are mostly women who have been suppressed by strict rules and patriarchal culture, deprived of entertainment, and not allowed to express themselves. Perhaps it's the highly repressive upbringing that drives them to madness. They form a core group, pretending to convulse, scream, and roll on the ground, claiming to have seen witches, ghosts, or fallen victim to someone's sorcery. In this process, they gradually realize the power they possess. By using this method, they can arbitrarily accuse anyone they dislike or have a grudge against. It could be solely based on jealousy towards someone's appearance, abilities, or status. The witch trials become their only source of entertainment, where they can be the center of attention and freely express themselves within religious fanaticism. And so, the concept of witches grows like a snowball, gaining momentum until it becomes an avalanche. Countless innocent people lose their lives under this avalanche, leaving a dark stain on human history. The never-ending witch hunt. In history, people's unfounded fantasies about witches led to countless tragic deaths and bloodshed. This kind of imagination was cloaked in a noble facade, but underneath lay the fervor of ignorance and cruelty. When we study history, we must not just scratch the surface, we must also learn to reflect. The deaths of those innocently accused as witches were utterly senseless. Even today, the internet harbors frightening systems of baseless accusations, causing numerous innocent casualties. We must be vigilant against these new systems of unfounded beliefs and beware of the devil lurking in our own hearts. And that's a wrap for this episode of the video. I'm DR.RED Panda. If any of you have your own perspectives, or if you think there are any errors in the video, feel free to leave a comment in the discussion section. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to subscribe and give it a thumbs up. Until next time, take care.